because we're a smaller service with 225 some crisis centers in the United States, whereas 911 has 5,500 plus public safety access points, we have to do things a different way. This is one of the ways in which we work with Mosaics. You are our partner in helping us get all of those calls to counselors in the right geography as fast as we possibly can.
Welcome back to No Hold Time. This is producer Jake. In the last episode, we talked with Grant Riewe, Chief Technology Officer of Vibrant Emotional Health. He was talking a lot about his personal interests, including baking cookies, playing musical instruments, and whale conservation. It was a really interesting conversation, so if you haven't listened to that one, please go back and check it out. We had just gotten into his work with Vibrant and how they support people in need, and that's where today's episode picks up. So, with that introduction out of the way, let's get on with the show.
And you've been there almost 2 years now.
Almost 2 years.
How have things changed over the year and 3 quarters that you've been there?
Yeah, well, I mean, we launched 988, so that's the first big thing. I appreciate that. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
The organization is 50-some years old, and so it's been around a long time, and it's got a relatively broad mission here. But what's happened in the last year is that we have been in a continuous period of evolution. We are old, as I've said. We're also a startup, and so we face those same pressures. And I say we're a startup because of the amount of pressure and, in particular, funding from the federal government around 988 that is causing us to go through a dramatic growth curve. I was roughly the 30th person brought into the technology organization. This year, I'm growing to 130. So in under 2 years, that growth exists, and in 2 years, I may double again.
Wow.
That is a crazy amount of growth for any organization, particularly a nonprofit.
Yeah. No, understood. You mentioned 988 a couple of times, and hopefully everyone that's listening knows what 988 is, but for those of them that don't, what is 988?
988 is properly the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. We say 988, those are the numbers that you can dial, just like 911. It is for people who are in suicidal or other forms of crisis, or for anyone who knows someone who is in crisis. So you do not have to experience it. You can call for your friend, right? It is for the whole range of the crisis ecosystem. I would roughly 85% of our contact volume is non-suicidal crisis. Financial distress, housing distress, domestic abuse, all common reasons to call. People who are experiencing those things are often on the path towards suicidality. And so the crisis line is for them and for their families and loved ones who need help navigating that system. This is an expansion of the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. It is available in all 50 states, all 6 U.S. territories. And then because we have a partnership with the VA and the Veterans Crisis Line, it is available at all of the OCONA sites, which is a fancy acronym for outside continental United States, but basically every U.S. installation around the planet, which I believe technically includes the space station.
Yeah. So you're providing a service that is out of this world.
Yes. I don't. How many other people do you have on this podcast that are an extraplanetary service, David?
No,
sometimes we think Bremer might be exoplanetary.
We agreed not to talk where Brian is today. Yeah. We're going to leave him there.
Yes.
He knows what he did.
Yeah, he does. He does.
Now, that's amazing. You also mentioned 911, which is a good setup. For those that might not know the difference or when to call, why don't we talk about that? Like, well, what's the difference between 988 and 911?
Yeah, 911 is a broad emergency service here. We've used it as a catch-all for anything here where we need public safety support here. But if you need police response or you need fire response or you need an ambulance, it's really that urgency of that situation. 911 is the number for you. Now, someone who's experiencing crisis or is experiencing homelessness and some sort of mental or emotional challenge at that time, 911 is frequently not the best resource to use. And so that's where 988 comes into the equation. Now, these services do have a relationship, right? They're not exclusive, nor are they the same. So if you call 988 and you have someone who is experiencing crisis and is at imminent risk of self-harm, you can still get dispatch help through 988. And I don't think enough people know that we do have mobile crisis teams all around the country that will come out and help. And it's unarmed response for someone who is in some form of behavioral health crisis. Those responses are typically done in coordination with 911 services. These are public safety access points on the 911 side here. They are community-based services. 988 doesn't know where help seekers are in precise ways, and so to do a dispatch, we do need to coordinate there. So those two services work together. The services are fundamentally different. 911 has been around a long time. That was started in 1968, for those that are counting here. So it's been around, predating all forms of the internet and most of the telephony that we could talk about. It predates all of that here. It's fundamentally rooted in the communities here. 988, having grown as a national hotline, is a centralized service. We want that support on the 988 side to happen within communities, but because we're a smaller service with 225 some crisis centers in the United States, whereas 911 has 5,500 plus public safety access points, we have to do things a different way. This is one of the ways in which we work with Mosaics. You are our partner in helping us get all of those calls to counselors in the right geography as fast as we possibly can.
Yeah. No, and thanks for the work you do and for highlighting that. We previously recorded an episode about automation and when it makes sense and when it doesn't, and sometimes, just to highlight that last point, is the most important things are getting the right kind of help as fast as possible, and that doesn't involve a ton of automation, but work on the back end and understanding where you need to get that help seeker as fast as possible.
Yeah, I've listened to some of your prior podcasts, and I have thoughts. When I think about automation, in particularly where automation goes wrong, it's because we've forgotten that there are humans as part of our equation.
Yep.
And I was listening to part of our conversation around natural language and IVRs, and there was this kind of push-pull on, we have the solution, it helps make it more efficient for customers to come in, except that we haven't taught the customers how to do the thing, and we have to here. And there was this interesting subtext of your conversation. It was like, well, after time went by, people kind of got used to it and it worked. Well, what happened here is society changed, culture changed around the interaction here. The automation piece is the same. Like we could have cut that adoption time, that net adoption time on keyword-driven voice IVRs from 10 years down to 1 year if we had designed with human-centered intentionality. And so when I'm thinking about automation, even in the context of all of my work, I don't do much automation in the 988 space because I do want to do the human-to-human connection. Yep. Any form of automation for me has to be reminded that we're providing something to the human. We're not going to change the human to do the thing. We're going to change the thing to support the human, which is something that I think we all understand philosophically, but then we get distracted by how to write lines of code.
Yeah. Well, that's a good segue into a question I have for you. Is being a technology leader in charge of driving innovation and adoption, how do you balance leveraging new technologies like AI, keeping in mind that you're providing such a critical service at a critical time to people?
Well, the answer cannot be don't use the new stuff.
Okay.
The answer also cannot be use the new stuff without thinking about the long-term impacts. So one of the ways in which we have engaged with this is to look at generative AI here and think about all of the things that that's doing to potentially change human to computer interaction. The solutions, these large language model solutions like ChatGPT and others are really amazing on how they work here, but it's kind of the gee whiz kind of amazing. I can't believe how this works here. If you probe at it at a couple different directions, it becomes less amazing pretty quickly, by which I mean if I use broken English to communicate with any of these systems, it fails. If English is my second or third language, it starts to fail. If I am highly emotional, it starts to fail. If I want to refer to something that I just talked about obliquely, it starts to fail. These aren't really conversational systems in that they can have human-to-human conversation. They're conversational systems in the sense that they can replicate transactional type conversations. It's a bit more broad than that. My primary problem that I'm solving for here is humans who are in a deeply emotional state. They are experiencing some form of crisis, and it requires all of the nuance of a highly trained, highly empathetic human to even have a chance at helping this individual. The new technology that exists in the Gen AI space isn't even close to that level. So it has to be a hard no for that. But that doesn't mean it's a hard no for everything, right? Gen AI is wonderful at generating technical documentation. So you can bet that I'm going to use it for that. I am experimenting with other forms of AI to do predictive models or look at how I can do topic modeling around public conversations to do predictive demand. I mean, there's a whole bunch of other things that I can do that are not in that clinical interaction, either with the help seeker or with the counselor. So my answer is I've got to use these new technologies. I've got to figure out what's different about my particular use case, and then I got to figure out what needs to be true to introduce it into those areas where it could be most useful. And I'm going to be more conservative because I'm trying to save lives.
Yeah, that's fair. And you said a couple words that I want to get Jake to add to our dictionary. We have definitions being tracked that he's linked to our website. And something that, a couple words that you say that are different to how we normally talk about here in CX. So we always talk about either customers or guests. In your case, they're not customers, they're help seekers, and I love that word. And then normally agents would be counselors for you. And I love the words help seeker because I think, and I mentioned this in a previous podcast, and then we just had an event in New York that you and I were both at, and I've talked about my Hispanic heritage, and sometimes it's asking for help that is the hardest part. And so that word, I mean, just that phrase to me means like, hey, I've decided that I need help. Get me some help. And that's how you mentioned that. I just love, it's not a question, it's a comment.
Well, we live in a world of complexity where we're trying to welcome people in and not give them some burden of having to do something with that help. So a help seeker, someone is acknowledging that there is something that they need support with, and we can give them access to that. We're not forcing it upon them here, right? So it is important to know that when you call 988 or text or chat 988, you're getting to a human, and that human's first job is to listen.
Yep.
Really listen. What is happening with you? With permission, that counselor is going to provide you some stabilizing skills, help you feel like you can continue to help yourself. You've already made the first step.
Yeah.
Let's help you make a couple more, and then show you what the range of options are that are available to you to take further steps forward. And that doesn't mean that you can't call again. Right. We give you another term here. So we don't have frequent callers, right? Mm-hmm. We have familiar voices. Mm. These are people who call us and engage with us again and again. We know them. We know things about them. They can continue to interact with us. We will continue to provide them the support. They are familiar voices.
Yeah. Yeah, that
good.
repeat caller does not sound good compared to that or appropriate.
That's awesome. And let's say a help seeker reaches out, and I think the ideal situation is someone is in a great mental state and they don't reach out. Mm-hmm. But let's say I've decided that I need some help, and I reach out. I dial 988. What is an ideal path? Like, what is the ideal result?
What the ideal result is you get the help that you were looking for, and you're able to move on with that help. Mm-hmm.
Like, do you have a goal on how quickly it happens, or just like the process as they get to the actual help?
So, do I have a goal? Yes. And this is a goal that we set in partnership. All the things that Vibrant does around 988 are funded by SAMHSA, and our work is done in partnership with them. We have a cooperative agreement with them. We are the 988 administrator working on their behalf here. So they're the ones that kind of set our goals and targets. We have an inform on that. So our goal for the network is 95% of interactions answered within 20 seconds. So that is maybe for some of your listeners common, because that's the same benchmark that we have in the 911 space that comes out of research by NENA, the National Emergency Number Association. Yep. So that is one way that I have a goal. I'm really looking to get that help seeker to a human with as little friction as possible and with as little navigation, influence, guide, steps, let's say options on the IVR as possible. So right now for us, if you call 988, you do hit an IVR. There are primarily 3 options in the United States. There is, in the state of Washington, we have a 4th option here. You can step back, you can immediately switch to Spanish. And then the IVR will repeat itself in Spanish, so that's really one option. Option number 1 is for veterans to jump over to the Veterans Crisis Line. We have an LGBTQIA+ subservice that does specific support nationally there. And then in the state of Washington, we have Native and Strong, which is for Native American community-based support, which is different than Western medical clinical support. After that, if you don't choose any of those options, we'd love for you to get help in the community. Again, that's where we plug in the Mosaic solution to help us route quickly as possible. We're going to offer to that center. Most of our calls, by which I mean in the high 80s percentage-wise, are answered by that first center locally. And then if it can't be answered by that first center locally, we provide national backups or state backups. Yeah. So I really want people to have a very few number of options, single layer IVR, and then I want to get them to a human as quick as I can.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thanks for providing that background. I know we, in partnership with you guys, launched some improvements or more features on Spanish. Mm-hmm. And we've talked in previous episodes about me being a Spanish speaker and how Spanish is different in Mexico versus Colombia. Mm-hmm. And I was just in New York, and there's all sorts of different versions of Spanish. How do you, or can you share? You could say can't talk about this. which version, or how do you pick which Spanish, or do you pick and just try to kind of corral it all into being able to understand all forms of Spanish?
This is a really hard question, right? Not the question that you're asking me is hard, but the question under the question here. One of the first questions is, what should the first language beyond English be that we expand support to? I think that it is logical for some that Spanish might be that language here, and let's just say that is logical for all of us, but we don't have an understanding of what variant, dialectic or cultural variant, because you noted before, David, is like the way Spanish speakers use words means different things, not just literally, but also the cultural impact of that word choice. And so for us, we have kind of broadly implemented I think it's Castilian Spanish here is that we actually implemented here. We didn't make that choice. That was kind of determined by our federal partners here. But we have to think about how we provide other forms. I will say that our biggest Spanish-speaking crisis center is in Puerto Rico. And so that is a different form of Spanish entirely. Our second largest center is in Texas. That's a different form of Spanish entirely. And you don't get those options when you press number 2. You don't get to say, well, I'm actually of Puerto Rican descent. I'm living in New York. I really would like to connect to someone who knows Puerto Rican Spanish. Right? But that option isn't available to us. We can hope that that's going to be something that we can create, but that would also imply, if you press 2, okay, now we're going to go to a second layer of IVR, and you're going to choose through the 30 plus varieties of Spanish that are spoken in the United States. Nope, that's a bad help seeker experience. We have to find a new way to kind of navigate that. Technology may help us. One of the things that it also implies is, how do we choose the third language here? And I'm not here to say that we know what that third language is. I can say that there are conversations happening about what that third language might be, but that's going to immediately, no matter what the language is or the language set it is, it's going to immediately have the same problem. Dialectic, cultural variation, how do we choose here? One of the things that does not happen for us, that might happen in another call center, is a warm transfer. When you connect with that counselor is there with you. Unless that counselor cannot handle your situation, they still wouldn't leave you. They might bridge a supervisor in to help. Maybe you ask for some specific help and they say, well, this person could do that and get consent for a transfer, but that would never happen in a critical situation.
Yeah.
What would we do if we could not communicate in language? One of the things that we do today is we have a partnership with a language service organization, and so those individuals get bridged into calls. So we have some ways to navigate, but this is a very, very difficult conversation, right? Or a very difficult problem to solve.
Yeah.
I don't have a good solution. Maybe you do. I would welcome it.
I have ideas.
Yeah,
we can talk about over a meal or something.
So, David, can I ask a question here, and if you can share? So, a lot of times we talk a lot about customer experience and employee experience, and thinking about, in a contact center world, the agents and the high agent attrition, and what we can do to help supplement what they do. In your world with counselors and the type of work they do, how do you go about kind of managing counselors that are taking these critical calls on a daily basis?
So, first of all, our counselor population is not like a normal agent population, right?
Yep.
People who do this work are drawn to do the work. They are mission driven here. They're all trained crisis counselors. So they go through training, but they all have it as an avocation anyway.
Yep.
That means that my attrition, my turnover rate is extraordinarily low. I say mine. Vibrant does have an internal crisis center here to help. We are part of the 988 network, but there's 225 other centers in the network. In general, counselor turnover is very low because of the mission-driven capability here. We do have operational procedures to create breaks for counselors when they've been on the phone for too long, or they've supported someone and the outcome has been less than positive, right? We may take them off the phones or send them home for the day, whatever is appropriate to the counselor, and it is really oriented at that counselor because they're all unique. Some of them just want to get right back in the saddle here because they are so driven by the work. But our turnover is very low. We create breaks, we create operational procedures, but for our population, and I like to talk about one of our most senior crisis counselors. She doesn't take calls actively right now, but you know, she's involved at a more senior programmatic level. You know what she does in her off time? She goes to Uvalde, Texas to counsel families of the school shooting that was there. That's what she does on her weekend, on her downtime. And that's what she's done through her entire career. These individuals, and we're lucky to have them. We should continue to support them in all the ways. They are just driven to do this work. So we give them all of the opportunities to do that here, but mainly it's about support. Now the question that you did not ask that I would go after is, how can we evaluate more directly whether there is fatigue in the counselor population? And I think that would be an interesting topic for us to explore at some future point.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. That's a good question.
I just, we were talking so much about the help seekers, and I'm just putting my, being a longtime contact center agent and thinking about myself in a role as a counselor and how you would manage through that.
Yeah. I actually sat next to someone on one of my flights out to Omaha who was wearing a 988 bracelet, and I said, "Nice bracelet," and it turns out he's a counselor. And so I talked to him the entire time, and I tried to ask him questions about his support because I feel that's just something that people outside of people in the industry don't ask about. Like, "Hey man, how are you doing?" So it's good to hear that. And he had great things to say about the support he was getting from his team and things like that. So it's good to not to shift away. Well, we will shift away from 988, even though I will say this. Being a part of the launch of 988 and Text to 988 is by far the coolest thing that I've been a part of in my career. So thanks for choosing us to be.
You know, I'm listening to your other podcast, so I hear you say this was the coolest telecom client I ever worked with. So I am gonna fact check you and hold you to it.
This is true. I mean, these are things I've told my wife, my friends. Anytime someone asks me, "What do you do?" I talk about what we do in partnership with Vibrant. Thank you for bringing us along for the ride. I'll say that 988 gets a lot of the headlines at Vibrant, but I know that you do a ton more outside of 988. Can you share, for those that don't know, what else you do?
Yeah. So yes, 988. We have other national programs. I've already talked about our partnership with the VA and Veterans Crisis Line, which of course is tied in to 988. We also do the Disaster Distress Helpline, which is in partnership with FEMA here, and so that's a kind of a line that is really effective around natural disasters, hurricanes primarily, but we're actually starting to see an uptake of that line for shooting, gun violence situations as well. That's one division of Vibrant. We have another division of Vibrant, which is our internal crisis center here to help. And H2H is part of the 988 network, but we also provide services to a variety of other organizations, particularly the City of New York and the State of New York. We operate half dozen different programs across that. That can be for government employees in the state. It can be for participants in the New York teaching system here. There's other lines of access that come in here here to help. And then we have some partnerships that we do. NFL Lifeline, NFLLifeline.org, right, where we are in partnership with the NFL for all players, personnel, staff to call, and we can help them navigate their own EAP, Employee Assistance Program, for getting access to help within the organization. And then beyond that, we also have in-community programs, direct service programs here that we do, primarily in New York, but not exclusively. We have sites, we do adult services, we do teen services, we do child and family services, all of whom are not necessarily related to suicide prevention and intervention, but to all sorts of mental, emotional, behavioral health here. So we've been in the space for a long time, and actually our communities programs are where we started, and the Crisis Contact Center didn't emerge until 2 or 3 decades ago, and then of course the national program has become the marquee.
Yeah, great. No, it's one of the things that I've learned in conversations with, particularly like DJ on the Vibrant team, that wants to ensure that we highlight all of the things you do, not to take away from the amazing things that 988 has done and continues to provide service for people, but thanks for sharing that. And I think those are all the questions I had. Eric, anything you want to add?
Yeah, no, I think you covered it.
Grant, any questions for us?
Yeah.
Yeah, I do have questions for you.
Okay.
Maybe we'll start with Eric.
Okay.
So the dread can build within you, David. But hearing what I've said about the bias for a human-to-human connection, and knowing what you've done in terms of your role as an agent, and then kind of your role here at Mosaics, is how would you think about new technology for customer experiences, novel customer experiences, in my particular scenario? What would you advise me to think about, knowing what I've said so far?
Well, what immediately came to mind was back to the language conversation we were having, and the ability to flatten or navigate to the, if it's a different dialect for Spanish, and instead of going, choose this selection for Spanish and then pick from this laundry list of different types of dialect or areas, that if there was a way to, use technology to be able to, for that person to specifically say, this is who I'm looking to speak with. So being able to identify if it is a language, being able to get an individual to someone that could speak that specific dialect of that language. That's where my head went immediately.
How might we solve that? You don't have to answer that
right now.
Yeah,
right.
You
And that's where my head's going. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, it's speech, right? It's speech.
It's speech.
It's instead of press 1 for veteran, it's say 1 for veteran, but 2 for Spanish, you say Español, right? And then the way you say Español, could, depending on how we leverage the language models, could say a lot about how you say Español.
I like where you're headed. I want to put a wrench in your works. The people who engage with us, and I'm not even at your hard question yet, David. The people that engage with us are people who are in crisis. They are at the worst moment in their life. And when we think about a keyword-driven IVR, or even just a conversational voice IVR, we're asking someone who is in crisis to express something that allows us to navigate them to a human. How do we solve for people who do not have their full cognitive capabilities when they come in contact with us?
That could be some homework for Eric.
It is,
All I want you to do is change how we conceptualize conversational navigation systems.
And
that's it.
Exactly. And it's exactly. And it's something we've talked about. I mean, in being in this industry for way too long. The one thing we've always talked about is how do you, understanding the mood that a customer, when they're engaging with our system, because when I was an agent and when I got into this business and being at the front line answering phone calls, I always wondered, how did they get to me? and why potentially were they frustrated, or did something happen to when I said, thank you for calling, how may I help you, they just would unload on me. So getting it to be more on the upstream side of this now, I always wondered, how do we gauge the temperature, the mood of that customer, and then how would we be able to inform potentially the live agent taking that phone call? Here's everything we were able to gather, and it's a nut we haven't quite cracked over the years. But your question kind of had me thinking again of how do we deal with the customers, or in your situation, the help seekers' emotions, and how are we responding and gathering information at sort of that heightened level of emotion? So thank you for the question, because it's something that I ponder all the time, but it's something that we need.
Yeah, and it's even more difficult with grants
it
application
is.
because
Absolutely.
we don't know who they are. We don't know that they're a friendly voice.
Yeah. Yeah.
We don't, have their account number.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Yeah. Very different.
It's a challenging problem.
It is.
My hypothesis is that the technology portion of the answer does not sit on the front end of the interaction. And that's as much of support hints with your homework that you get today. David, my question for you would be adjacent to where Eric left his, because you have been, open about, your Hispanic heritage and kind of what you bringing to the table. I think my question to you is, how does it feel to be forced to code switch to engage with a service like this? And what would you like it to feel like instead?
I don't know, maybe expand. What do you mean?
Well, to a certain extent, and I'm projecting, so please correct me if I'm projecting incorrectly, but your experience, as a child, and certainly linguistically, is not necessarily the primary experience or expression that you get here in 988, right? We could use language as a proxy, but really I'm going after culture, right? And the nut of my question is, when you call 988 or when you interact with that service, do you feel authentically heard? Do you feel authentically seen? And if not, how much would that mean to you? And what could we do to make it feel like we see you as David, the individual?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And I feel I could open up a lot more detail, but I'll put it this way. Just to sort of play a parallel into my personal life, right? I'm at a concert in Chicago. I live in Chicago. I'm at a concert, and it's a Mexican band. And there are people from all over Latin America in this concert, because they're a pretty big Mexican rock band. And there's people from Argentina, and I can just tell by the accents. And one guy, I have one sentence interaction with this one guy, and we instantly both know that our families are from Mexico City, right? And so instantly my entire conversation went from like, oh, hey, we're both Hispanic, to like, oh, hey, you know what I know. We know what's going on, right? And so back to your question, fortunately I've never been in a situation where I have to call 988. We've done testing, but I've never been in a situation where I need to call it. But I do think that having someone on the other line, whether they're SMS or phone call, I think more in this case a phone call, where it's someone that sounds like me or knows my background. You talked about this, Grant. People are calling and they're not in their best mental capacity, right? And so if I call someone who understands me, who knows my troubles and where I've been, instantly makes me just feel, even if it's a little bit better. And so you are, before the conversation really gets started, already a step ahead of where I was before I called.
I loved your story because you are highlighting the game change that it is to connect with someone who you've interpreted through most minimal verbal cues,
Right.
has a shared experience with you.
Yeah.
And my question, is to in part enlist you and have you think about how we can solve some of the more thorny problems. The largest at-risk group that doesn't contact 988 for support are Black youth, 8 to 14-ish, particularly boys. We don't have a way of engaging with them that gets that same sense that you just highlighted on, oh, you understand me, you hear me. Dialing a phone number, that ain't for them. Texting, maybe. Web chat, absolutely not. So we're in video phone, probably not. So we got one of 4 channels that we might be able to engage in. And even then, if there's a pre-chat survey or pre-SMS interaction, that probably is going to push them away. That how do we engage?
Yeah.
How do we engage? Second highest at group, middle-aged white men in rural America. That's a different problem entirely.
Yeah.
They can make a phone call. They might not text. They might web chat. Because we know that they're on the web, right? Probably not video phone. So we got 2 of 4 channels. The question is, do they feel like they could ask for help? And if they did, would that feel safe to them or emasculating? If we can find ways to replicate the connection you had at your rock concert, which we could do a variety of ways, but the point is, like, you had a brief exchange, you got a connection, you were able to do something with that. This is one of my challenges I would love to solve for this problem. It's not purely a technical solution. I don't believe it to be a technical solution. I believe it to be a comprehensive solution. But how do I get after these things? So, me, being a straight white, middle-aged white dude, I do not have the right frame of reference to solve these problems, except that I can acknowledge that I understand that they exist and look to enlist others in the cause for help me find ways to connect.
Yeah. It's a good approach. Café Tacuba was the name of the band. And I connected to this guy, and he was from a notoriously rough neighborhood in Mexico City, the rough of the rough. And so I just knew that if it was going to go down,
That's
I
your
was
guy.
sticking
That's
with
your
that.
guy.
You had safety. You had all kinds of
Yeah.
safety. In one sentence, you had all kinds of safety.
Yeah. Well, Grant, thank you so much for joining us. Just thanks to our listeners, and we'll highlight it again. If you need help, you can text, call 988, and Grant's mentioned it, that we've brought in other partners and areas that have specialties that can get you help. But thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it. We've given Jake a lot of work to do, and look forward to many more conversations and continuing to improve on what we're doing. But thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Grant.
Thanks for your support.
If you or someone you know is struggling or in crisis, help is available. Call or text 988 or chat 988lifeline.org.
One sentence and you knew where it was from. I was thinking, okay, me, Midwesterner all my life, and what would connect me, like I could connect with someone immediately. Like if somebody said, hey, do you want to pop? I'd go,
No, if I go back to you and I go, oop,
uh-huh,
that's all I need. You just need an oop.
uh-huh. Yeah,
You want some hot dish?